Welcome back to Busch Gardens, Williamsburg, in Williamsburg, Virginia. Now, some of you might remember a walkthrough I did last year where I wasn't too happy with the park. And we made a return trip this year, and things were much, much better. For one thing, last year we paid $103 a person, and half the park was closed. This year, we paid half that amount and everything was open. So that sort of evened out and made up for it. So what I want to do is just do a brief walkthrough here because we've walked through this before, but now you'll be able to see it with everything running and all the food places, or I should say most of the food places, are staffed. This is the famous bucolic entrance to the park. And what I'm going to do is take a left over here and go down this lovely little path, a shady path with the waterfalls. And shade is definitely welcome at this park. There's a lot of it. The day we were there, it was about 103 degrees in the shade. So be aware that it's a very hilly park and it's often very, very hot here. So prepare yourself for that. One thing I should say is we got our parking tickets online ahead of time as well, and we thought we were going to save some money, and when we got to the park we found that they had actually lowered the parking prices, and so we actually overpaid by getting it ahead of time online. Parking dropped. It was $35 last year. It's now $32 in the 2024 season. So this is the entrance to the park. There's the security gates. Ahead of it are the ticket gates, and we're of course going to just pass right through. And one nice thing they do is right at the entrance, they have a height check station, so if you have kids, they'll know exactly what rides they can get on. The first thing you're going to see is Banbury Cross, or the English section of the park, with the Tudor-style buildings. This is a really interesting section. There really isn't anything here except on the left you have a theater, and it used to show 4D shows for a while, and then it had musicals, and they were usually themed to British music. This one here is American Jukebox, so I don't know what American Jukebox is doing in a British section, but we actually didn't get to see the show. It wasn't running when we were there. And there's the mock-up of Big Ben. Over there are some restrooms and a water bubbler and also a filler station if you have a water bottle. The only way you can get out of this section is through here, and this leads to all other sections of the park. And from here, you can go straight ahead into Heather Downs, or the Scotland section. You can take a right into Killarney, or the Irish section, or you can go left, which will eventually take you to Festa Italia. And essentially the park is a gigantic circle. And what we're going to do is make a clockwise tour of the park with a couple little detours along the way. Now, as we head this way, you'll notice over on the left there's a station, and that is for the Sky Ride. And then you'll notice those striped gates for trains, and that indicates that there are two ways to get around this park besides walking. One of them, of course, is the train. And there's a station in Scotland, there's a station in Festa Italia, which we're coming up to, and there's also a station in the New France area, the Canada area. The gondolas, or the Sky Ride, stops here, of course, in Scotland. It also makes a stop in the Bavarian section, and it also makes a stop in the France area. So that's a little relief from the walking. Coming up here on the left is the Sesame Street Forests of Fun, which is a kids' play area. And now we're heading a little bit to the right here, and we're coming up on the first ride that you encounter in the park in this area. This is Escape from Pompeii. It's a very large shoot-to-chute ride, and unfortunately, it went down as I started this walkthrough, so you can't see it splash. It does make a sizable splash. You have this observation deck over here, and we'll just walk out on the observation deck anyway to see what you would see if it were coming down. As you might expect, this ride is extremely popular on the hot Virginia summer days. And the theming inside this building, although when we were there a lot of it wasn't functioning the way it's supposed to, it is pretty impressive. You basically see Pompeii fall apart and burst into flames before your very eyes. So let's continue walking through this area. You can see why the transportation methods in this park are really welcome, because it's a huge park. It's about 422 acres, and it was started by the Anheuser-Busch Corporation, as you might tell by the name. They started a brewery nearby, and you could get tours of the brewery, and they wanted people to hang around longer, so they started building up amusements nearby, and this grew to be a massive undertaking and quite a remarkable theme park, probably one of the greatest theme parks ever built. And it was quite a different theme park. So rather than theming it to characters or stories, they themed it to countries in Europe. Originally it was called Busch Gardens The Old Country, and it tried to recreate scenes of old Europe. And it opened with 6 areas. Now it has 9 separate areas, and each one had its own music in it. Each one had its own food, so you could actually sample cuisine from each of those areas of Europe. It was really remarkable. And of course the plantings that you see all over, and there are a lot of them. Busch Gardens has award-winning landscaping. It all reflects the different countries that it comes from, and you'll see that as we go through. So what we're coming up on here, I love that little walkway into this area. If we go straight, that'll take us to a different area, and we're going to go left into the Festa Italia area. And there are quite a few rides crammed into this small area. It's pretty much a dead end. You have to come back over this bridge to get out of it, but there's certainly enough room so that it doesn't get crowded in there. This bridge spans the train tracks, and the train station is further on into the Festa Italia section. So you can tell how the music changed, and you can also see a definite difference in the architecture in this section. And it has the usual stuff you'd expect at an amusement park. So you have games, you have gift shops, and you have beautifully themed rides. What you see, that domed building in front of us, is a teacups ride. There's a basketball game called Pantheon Hoops, and there is my favorite ride in the park, which unfortunately was not running. It's the constant theme of my life here. My favorite ride is not running. Apollo's Chariot, which is this incredible ride, up and down and up and down and up and down. It's airtime galore, wonderful steel coaster. Here's a little kiddie elephant run, they call it, but it's a kiddie Himalaya ride. And now coming around this corner is one of the newer rides in the park, Pantheon. I didn't get to experience it last year, but I did get to experience it this year, and it is really intense. It's multiple launches that are a gut punch, and it sends you back and forth through a really twisted course. And over here you can see the train just leaving the station. That's where you would board the train. Now, over on the right here, you can see this gargantuan fan. They had these all over the park, and it was really welcome on that day. If you follow that little path up there, you'll find the entrance to the Roman Rapids ride, where you can get completely drenched. This is Tempesto, which is, it just never seemed to fit in there for me. It's basically a stock coaster that has very low capacity. You see it usually at smaller parks. I guess they got a deal on them, and that's why they have one here. But to me, it's just not in keeping with the rest of the intricate theming at this park. But it's another ride for people to do. It can have really long waits, so you probably want to get to it early. Bye-bye, Apollo's Chariot. We hardly knew you. So, we're going to cross back over this bridge and head to the next section, which is also Italian, the San Marco area. Busch Gardens Old Country opened in 1975, and it was later renamed to Busch Gardens Williamsburg. Then it got renamed to Busch Gardens Europe. Then it went back to Busch Gardens Williamsburg, and that's the way it stayed. You could tell that Anheuser-Busch was really proud of this park. They kept it immaculate and authentic, and it was one of my favorite parks in the world, actually. Even though I haven't been around the world much, it felt like I had been around the world by being in this park. But no, it really was a spectacular experience. And in 2008, Anheuser-Busch sold themselves off to InBev, the European beverage manufacturer. And InBev didn't want anything to do with the park, so they spun it off to Blackstone Entertainment Group, and that's who's managing it now. One thing that I have noticed is that under Blackstone, the park has begun to lose some of its authenticity, and that matters to me because I really loved how immersed you were in the experience of being in Europe when you were in this park. And now if you go to the food places, you don't get necessarily authentic cuisine. I mean, they have stereotypical cuisine. Like you go to Italy, you'll get pasta, but it's not the real authentic pasta that you used to get under the Busch management team. Most of the food, though, now is fairly generic. You know, hamburgers, hot dogs, steak, chicken. But even so, it's still quite a beautiful park. So we are now walking through the San Marco section. The area that you saw a minute ago there used to have a top spin ride. They took that out, and they're going to be replacing that at some point with something else. All of these buildings are really nicely detailed. Again, they're just regular little shops along the street, but you feel like you're on an Italian street. And notice the pavement. You know, it's not blacktop. It's not concrete. It's this really nicely pebbled, finished surface that feels good under your feet, gives you good traction, and is not blazing hot. And over here on the left is Mama Stella's, which is the Italian eatery. And in front of us is the Teatro. The Teatro is a theater where they have musical acts. I love the graffiti on these walls. It's graffiti done as if ancient Romans were doing graffiti. And this has a lot of places where you can sit in the shade and eat or just relax and hear the music. Now, last year when we got to this point, those of you who remember, Arrivederci San Marco, we had to double back because they were reconstructing the massive bridge that connects San Marco with the next area that we're going to enter, Octoberfest, which is the first of two German-themed areas. This bridge, if you didn't know that it had been reconstructed, you would never know it was reconstructed because it looks pretty much identical to the way it did before it was reconstructed. So they did a nice job maintaining the original look. And it's got some wonderful views. Over there you can see Verbolten, which we'll be seeing in a little bit. And over off to the right, the yellow track is Loch Ness Monster. The blue track is Alpengeist. And that yellow tent is the Rhine River Cruise. Now, the Rhine River, I found out on this trip, is not a river. I always thought it was. It's just a giant man-made lake. And the lake basically is self-contained, so it's not flowing, it doesn't really go anywhere. Loch Ness Monster was rehabbed this year. There you can see the cruise boat coming back. The Loch Ness Monster was rehabbed this year with new track, and it was riding the smoothest I've ever felt it. There's the return track for Verbolten. That whole area where Verbolten is used to be home to one of the greatest suspended coasters ever built. Big Bad Wolf was an amazing ride, and a lot of roller coaster enthusiasts were very sad when it was taken out. Verbolten is a good ride. It's not Big Bad Wolf, but it's still quite a good ride. And it maintains a similar theme of going, prowling through a town, basically, just with a different storyline to it. So again, you notice the change in music as we get to this point, and you notice the change in architecture. Over on the right, this wonderful little sort of picnic pavilion area that you see, very colorful. That used to be a drop tower that they took out, and it's a nice use of that area. It's very busy. And over here on the left, of course, what's a German section without big pretzels, right? Over here on the left is Verbolten. So there's the entrance. And the trains for the coaster are really well themed to these European cars. You can see a little VW bug up there. They don't have any VW bugs on the track, but it has some really interesting surprises in it, and I'd recommend it just for some of those surprises if you've never ridden the coaster before. There's a pretty typical swing ride, and off in the distance is a bumper car ride, and there goes Verbolten off on the course. And climbing up this way, you can see this massive building. I'm not sure if it still is, but at one time it was the largest indoor eatery in the world. It is the Fest House, and there's lots of food in there. You know, typical food that you would get. They even have veggie burgers, which I was very happy about. There's an arcade. And we're just going to take a quick look, if you've never seen the Fest House before, just to get a sense of how big it is and how beautifully it was themed. They put a lot of resources into making this a really impressive building. On the outside here, you'll see when we come back, there's all this beautiful stained glass, and it reflects the 6 original lands that were in the park. They also have a stage show here that runs daily. It's a German music show, and it's a lot of fun. If you have little kids, they'll really get a kick out of it because the performers involve the kids in the show. I love how there are all these bas-relief buildings embedded into the walls to make it really feel like you're sitting in a German village. And there's that stained glass window with the Anheuser-Busch logo. The building is also air-conditioned, amazing for its size, but it is incredibly cool in there, which makes it all the more torturous to go back out into the blast furnace air of a hot southern summer. And as we head over to the next section of the park, we have one more major ride to look at, and it's that huge castle that you see on the left. Plenty of Pikachu, if you need one. The castle that you see in front of us at one time was the Curse of Dark Castle, which was one of the most amazing dark rides that I'd ever been on. And the park dismantled that dark ride, and then last year they unveiled it as Dark Coaster. So it maintains some of the characters and themes of Dark Castle, but it makes an in-the-dark roller coaster. And you sit in what you saw there, like a snowmobile. That's what you sit in. And it's a multiple launch coaster in the dark. And it's actually a very small amount of track, but you go around it multiple times, and since it's in the dark, you have no clue where you are, so it feels like a much longer ride. A very clever idea. It is, again, they call it a family ride, but it has a real gut punch to it. The launches are pretty strong. It's fun, but very disorienting. So just realize if you tend to get motion sickness, that's probably not the ride for you. So the area that we were leaving, that which is called Octoberfest, that used to be the Bavarian section. Now we're going into the section that currently is called Germany, but used to be called the Rheinfeld. As we've come to expect, beautiful plantings, lots of shade. The carousel that you see in front of you, the Kinder Carousel, is one of the oldest rides in the park. It's an antique Herschel carousel. Great for kids. This clock that you see up here on the building has figures that come out just like an animated German cuckoo clock, and they'll do a little dance on the hour. Straight ahead of us is Land of the Dragons, which is a huge playscape area for kids. And also, there's one of the Skyride stations. And there's also a path going down there. And I don't think I've ever explored it in a video, so let's go there, shall we? Through the magic of cinematography, we're actually starting in the Scotland section. And we're going down here, and we're going to pop back up where we just left off a moment ago. And unfortunately, this area is not handicapped accessible. So if you have mobility issues or if you have a wheelchair, there's really no easy way down here. But if you do go down here, you get a great view of Loch Ness Monster. And here it comes, back to the station. It was built in 1978 and was the first, and now it's the only remaining, aero development coaster with interlocking loops. And in the past, the park used to run it so that the timing of the trains was such that they would go through the loops. The two trains would go through the loops at the same time. So one would be going through the lower loop and one would be going through the upper loop. So we're now strolling across the boardwalk on the Rhine River. The bridge in the distance is the one we walked across going from San Marco over to the Octoberfest section, the one that was rebuilt. And there's the yellow canopy of the Rhine River Cruise. So this is how you get to the loading station for the Rhine River Cruise. And besides going up the stairs we just came down, the only other way out of this area is to go up these stairs, which, thankfully, they're not plentiful, but there is a very long uphill ramp that goes from here as well. And that ramp will bring us to Land of the Dragons, where we left off just a few moments ago. And above us you can see the Skyride station for the Rheinfeld section. And unless they change their policy, with the Skyride you're supposed to get off at each station and then get back on if you want to continue the journey. Unlike the train where you can just stay on and go as far as you want. And here we are, so let's resume from where we left off. Normally on the right here, there's an ice cream shop that serves really good ice cream. That wasn't open. But when you get to this fountain, there's only one way to go from here. You have to go to the left, and that will take you through the rest of the Rheinfeld section where there are some really nice shops. I love all these stained glass windows. Now up ahead here you can see that sign hanging with the pocket watch on it. This used to be the Father Time shop, which was my favorite shop in Busch Gardens, and it was filled with authentic Black Forest cuckoo clocks from Germany, and grandfather clocks, and they were beautiful, very, very pricey, but authentic and beautiful. That's been really cut down now. They have a small display case with a few of the cuckoo clocks in there that you can still buy, and they're still pricey. But if you want an authentic cuckoo clock and can't afford to go to Germany to get one, this is a place you can get one. So now we're coming around the corner here into a tiny section that was built specifically for one ride. This ride, Alpengeist. It's a sort of Switzerland section, and over here you get a really good view of the entire ride. So let's stop and take a look. Alpengeist is a B&M suspended looping coaster that is extremely intense. Very disorienting, a lot of G-forces in it, so be warned. The ride is themed to a vacation on the ski slopes that goes horribly wrong. They have a lot of fake snow in here. It's really nice, again, beautiful landscaping, a lot of whimsy in this area. But it's very tiny. This is it. This little tiny circle is it. Alpengeist Station is in front of you right there. The exit to Alpengeist is over on the left. And you have some lockers and a couple of drink stations, but that's about it. Now we'll go across this beautiful covered bridge into the New France or Canada section of the park. This bridge also gives you really good views of not only Alpengeist, but also another one of my favorite rides in the park, Le Scoot, which is a really nice flume ride. You also could glimpse in the distance that pile of track there, that knot of track, that is Invader, which again the park advertises as a family ride, but it is an extremely intense wooden coaster. It's not huge, but it is fast with a lot of twists and turns in it. Another nice visual contrast in this section. Lots and lots of wood, log cabin buildings, wooden fences, and again, looks completely different from the other areas of the park. I know the cardinal is the state bird of Virginia, but I'm not sure that billboard sends the right message. It looks like somebody is crushing those poor cardinals. There are maple leafs. You'll see those all over this section. And ahead of us is a path that circles around, and way at the far end there you can see this thing that looks like a battering ram. That's the entrance to Invader. Off to the left is the entrance to Le Scoot. Past Invader is the train station. And then off in the distance on the right is a scrambler. And that's really about it for this area, except for one of the park's biggest eateries, which is coming up here in a minute. And that's it in front of us. It's the entrance to Trapper's Smokehouse, which, as you might imagine, has smoked foods. They used to have an incredible smoked salmon, really delicious, and of course they got rid of it, but that was good. And now we're entering France, which is otherwise known as Aquitaine. The big blue coaster that you see in front of you is Griffon, which is a really good B&M dive coaster. The dive coaster is the kind that holds you on the edge of a 90-degree drop and lets you savor the fact that you're going straight face down to your death before releasing you. Over there, if you follow that little path, there's a walkway, and the ending of Griffon is a splashdown, and you can get nice and wet there on a hot day. There's Griffin's Gifts, which is the exit for the ride, and the entrance is around the corner. I love all the red umbrellas that seemingly float in the air in this section. There's Griffin's second huge hill, so let's watch it blast by. All right, let's continue on our journey. Again, gorgeous architecture throughout this area. Lots of shops. This had more closed shops than other areas of the park. Also, you see this clock in front here. Well, off to the left of that clock is a huge amphitheater. And the amphitheater holds musical events all throughout the year. And they used to have a Cirque du Soleil performance in there. That ended several years ago. And there is the other skyride entrance. So now you've seen all three of them. And there's the entrance to the amphitheater. It's pretty darn big. And you can see train tracks here. And when we cross the train tracks, we'll be entering yet another area of the park. This is a really interesting area. It's sort of an animal sanctuary area. There are two components to it, really. There's Lorikeet Glen, which is right in front of us, and there's also Wolf Haven, which we'll see in a minute. So you can go straight from here, but I'm going to take a left and wander through the Lorikeet Glen area. It's very peaceful in this area. Over here on the right, there's a animal show that happens during the day. The theme this year for Busch Gardens was Summer of Wonder. That's why you see those signs all over. This is Wolf Haven over here on the left, and they do have demonstrations of wolf training in that area. But over here, I actually happened by when they were doing a little talk about some of the wolves. It was very hot out, so they didn't keep the wolves out for very long.
He just looks really, really different now that he's older. Like I said, he's lighting up a good bit. Same with Kaya over there. Kaya, yeah, I said your name. Kaya is what's called a black phased wolf. That means she's born completely black in coloration, and she's phasing out that darker pigment as she gets older. Now, she is now 12 years old. She's a super senior. So,
as you would expect, the animals that they have here are rescue animals that would have died in the wild, and they're being rehabilitated here. Over on the left, you've got a couple of bald eagles that are staying in the shade. And this was interesting. While we were there was a gentleman painting a giant mural on the side of this building. And it's obviously, there are some horses there. It's really pretty, and I'll be interested to see what it looks like when it's finished. And now, going through this archway will bring us into Killarney. And again, there isn't a lot in Killarney. It's more of an atmospheric place. This area here, and it looked abandoned. They used to have a magic show that happened. It was really good, but I didn't see much going on there. And over here on the right is the theater where they have river dance, and river dance did not happen while we were there either, which is a shame because it's a really good show. That massive structure you see in the distance is Finnegan's Flyers, which is a stock screaming swing ride. Again, like Tempesto, I'm not fond of the placement of it. It just looks like a giant industrial ride in this otherwise bucolic setting. Over there on the left used to be a simulator ride through a leprechaun land, and it was really fun with moving seats and the 3D glasses. And that's been shut down for quite a while. I don't know what they're going to put in its place. Here's a gift shop with the famous tree out front. And notice Griffin in the distance. The lands are not separated too far from each other, but when you're in each of the lands, you never really notice anything else. Very much like the way Disney designed their parks, where it's completely immersive when you're in that land and you don't realize, oh yeah, I'm in a park that has a lot of other stuff in it. There's a beautiful waterfall here. These used to have a fog that was created around it to give this really mysterious feeling as you entered this area. And now you have a giant ride instead. And now we come up on the final section of the park, Heatherdowns, or Scotland. And you can go left from here, or you can go right. It takes you to the same place eventually. And yes, life is better together. Up here on the left is the Border Collie demonstration that I mentioned earlier in the video. And it is an upcharge. You have to pay $30 a person to watch the Border Collies. And now here I'm giving it to you for free. Hi, Karen. Now the actual exit from this area is to the left. I'm going to go right for two reasons. One of them is This brings you to the entrance of the Loch Ness Monster, which is a really nicely themed queue. And it's also where earlier, when you saw me going down those steep stairs, that's where the stairs are that take you down to the Rhine River. Over there is the long train trestle across the Rhine River. There's the entrance to Loch Ness Monster on the right. The stairway is to the left of it. And you can see some of the track through the trees. Of the 3 stations, you'll get the longest ride from Festa Italia. That goes all the way around to Canada. That's the longest stretch. If you go from Canada over to Scotland, it's pretty short. And if you go from Scotland to Festa Italia, that's the shortest route. It's maybe a 5-minute ride, if that. So this really is the middle of the Scotland section of the park. On the left are the stables, and under the Anheuser-Busch ownership, those were the actual Anheuser-Busch Clydesdales that they kept there. Now they have Clydesdales. They're not as big as the ones for Anheuser-Busch, but still they're pretty big, and it's really impressive to see them, and you get to pet them up close. If you go through the Tweedside gift shop, that takes you to the train station. Tweedside Gifts was also selling discarded track from Loch Ness Monster. When they put the new track on, they took some of the old track and cut it into little slices. And you can buy a little slice, so it's about 4 inches around and maybe a ½ inch thick, and they were selling those for $400 a piece. They didn't have any in stock at the time, and I wasn't going to spend $400 on a tiny ring of steel, but if you're into that sort of thing, they have them. So this pretty much wraps up our tour of Busch Gardens. We're heading back now into the Banbury Cross section, the England section of the park where we started. I really have mixed feelings about the park. I used to love it under the ownership of Anheuser-Busch. I still love this park. It still has some of the most impressive theming of any park I've ever been to. It has some really good rides with a lot of attention to detail. But I think the Blackstone group could have even more attention to detail, like with Tempesto and with Finnegan's Flyers, so that I really feel immersed in the lands of Europe, as opposed to feel like I'm sort of in a Six Flags park that has some theming in it. But anyway, if you're in the Williamsburg area, which has a lot of other stuff to do, including historic Williamsburg, I, of course, would recommend stopping by Busch Gardens, Williamsburg.